So before we start this class, let me just tell you that we have now a box at the back of the room here with a lot of masks. These are high-quality masks like PFF2, KN95, and so on, which had been bought by many. So you can help yourself if you feel you need a different mask, if you want to change your mask and you don't find anywhere near the place you are staying. So there will be masks. I hope we can have this every week or something like that. So help yourself with masks. Next days there will be more masks and so on. Okay, so let me put hot water. Okay, so we are ready to start our third week. And so this week we will continue to discuss interacting species and more in an ecological context still. But we will move to some aspects that have not been covered in our first discussion. And in particular, we will be, we'll try to do, to study competition between two species in a better way than we have done with the Lotka, with the Volterra model. Okay, so the problem with the equation that we have discussed is a little bit connected always to the fact that you have this carrying capacity, and then you have also these coefficients of competition, which are what we call phenomenological. They have clearly something to do with the consumption of resources and the relation of the environment to the species, but this has not been modeled. We have modeled only, for instance, logistic growth, where you have a carrying capacity, and carrying capacity is a shortcut for everything which comes from the environment will slow down the increase of the species. And when we did the competition models, we came to the point that we had also some coefficients of competition which we could not model. I mean, they were just saying that that's the effect of competition, but if the competition is for resources, then they have to do something with the resources. Okay? So what we will do here now, and I think it will be pretty simple actually, is to consumer is to study what is called consumer resource dynamics. So we will have a species that consumes a certain resource, and this resource has some kind of replenishment or some kind of dynamics. Okay, so what if I have time today, I wanted to discuss the first case, which is very simple. It's just one consumer and one resource, and then we want to go to two consumers and one resource, and then you could discuss two consumers, two resources, but this will be too mathematical, but you will see how things work. Okay, so we certainly want to have some function which is the consumer and some which is the resource. Okay, let me see just Okay, I will use n. It's arbitrary, okay? So this is the resource, and this is the consumer. And the growth of the consumer should somehow depend on the resource. Okay? So we will start with one consumer and one resource, and we want to model the fact that it's the consumer being the resource being consumed is what makes the population grow. So that's very, very similar to predator-prey, okay? It's actually predator-prey. If you point to one of the prey, it's other. But now, we don't want to get back to predator-prey simply. Why? Well, because of we want to do something which is simpler. Predator-prey has those cycles. And we want to have a model that is simpler. We want to study carrying capacity has nothing to do with cycles. And coexistence or exclusion between species is also not so much this cycle story, because you can have coexistence in situations where all of them are cycling and so on, in very complicated dynamics. So we want to have something simpler. Okay? So what we need to build a model first is something which will be something like that, which is dn dt, 1 over n, and here you have the resource. So there will be some growth, more resources, can be like that, can be something like that. Many possible ways to have this. And we need also something about the resource. Okay? So there are many possible ways, and I will choose one here. Okay? So we need dn dt. I will write it in this way, which will be something like the famous Holling type 2. Okay? I will do this only for one resource and one consumer. I will do something simpler in order to facilitate the calculations. When we discuss two consumers, I will just use the Holling 1, which is Lotka-Volterra-like. Okay? But here we can be a little bit more realistic. So we'll have something like that. And I will write it in this way. It's not the same way I wrote it before. Okay? Before I wrote it as something that was 1 plus something here, 1 plus some tau r. Okay? But this is the same, and you just have to divide by k, both sides, above and below. Then 1 over k will be this coefficients, okay? So this is just to help a little bit the algebra not being cumbersome. Okay? But this is typically something that is a consumer consuming a resource, and he has a certain saturation. He cannot consume indefinitely, okay? And then, well, the consumer will die in the absence, okay? There's no intrinsic growth rate for this species because it's a special species that's only one resource, okay? If I write something like plus r, something like plus r dot n here, like a Malthus term or something like that, or a carrying capacity, I will spoil all the discussion, because this means that there's some other resources, even if n is going to 0, okay? Even if r is 0, then you could have growth. It's growing on something. Okay, so you're implicitly putting some other resources. So you don't want this. Okay? And then I will make hypothesis here. Well, first, you want the consumer being consumed with the same form here. So that will be some minus R, and so R over K, which with some gamma is a coefficient of efficiency. Okay? You remember this from the discussion about predator pay, yeah? But now I have to put some way that this will grow. In the absence of the resource, I will look for the situation where the resource grows. But I won't suppose a logistic this time. Look, because this would be the Rosenstock-Macarthur, okay? And we don't want all cycles. So we can have a resource that is being manipulated. And somehow it's being fed into the system with a functional form here, which is called the semi-chemostat. But that's just a name, and you say that you have something like here, some coefficient A times some S minus R, where A and S are constants, and what is S? So if the resource is above S, then this has a tendency of being negative, and it will diminish. If it's below, it goes up. Okay, so this is trying to put the resource at the level S. Okay, and this is simple because this is a linear term. I don't need to, because with the carrying capacity I have all the nonlinear thing. Okay, and in this actually is, you remember our discussion about this term being a term that is creating instability, and the carrying capacity damping the things and creating stability. Okay? But then we saw that there were regions where you could have real stability, but you had also oscillations. With this, you don't have the oscillations. This is a damping that is stronger than the carrying capacity, because it happens not only at high resources. Okay? Carrying capacity, when you introduce the logistics for the resource, when the resource is small, it actually has no effect of the nonlinear term, the carrying capacity term. Okay? But here, and it is the carrying capacity term that damps the oscillations. But here it is present even if R is small. I mean, you have both effects, depending on S. So, well, this is a simple model. Right? And we want to look at the fixed point. Yeah? But what we do always is fixed point analysis. Okay? So fixed points. So we will look first for the first equation here. If I dn dt equal to 0, then I have R times R plus K minus M equal to 0. Okay? Nice? So, I will use the notation R star here. Okay? I'll put a star, which is the equilibrium resource. Okay? So I can solve this. Okay? This is an algebraic equation. It's linear. You manipulate a little bit, you get R star, which is is M K over R minus M. Okay? Everybody can see this here, and then, or you? Okay. So this is the equilibrium point for the resource. Okay? I mean, this is the equilibrium point for the species, wherefrom we get the equilibrium point for the resource. Okay? So, first lesson, R has to be positive. Okay? So, R star. So, R minus M has to be positive. Okay? Which means that here in this situation, it means that if the mortality is too big, then even the resource is not enough. Okay? Because the R is too small. Okay? So even if you have a lot of resources, in this case, your kind of efficiency here for this guy would be like too small. Even if it can consume a lot, it's not enough to overcome the natural death of the population, which is this term. Okay? So this is one. Well, now we have the second equation, dr dt equal to 0, which will imply R n star gamma over R star plus K plus alpha S minus R. Okay? So at equilibrium. Where? Minus. And you can solve this. I will just write the solution. It's just manipulating things here. N star will be A times S minus R star. R star plus K R gamma R star. Okay? And R is given here. Okay? You can substitute this there also. Okay? Well, so what we just calculated is that you have a consumer, you have a resource, and then you have an equilibrium point which you can show that is stable. And we have first conclusion is R has to be bigger than M, and S has to be bigger than R star. Okay? So you have to supply enough resources, because this is a positive term here, that's the supply of resources. You have to enough resources for this to be positive. Otherwise, n goes to 0, because 0 is also a possibility for n. Okay? So death rate can be too big, and S has to be sufficient to maintain the population. Now, what is this? This is the equilibrium population. Okay, so this is the effective carrying capacity. Okay, it goes to equilibrium, and that's the carrying capacity, without even talking about carrying capacities. Okay, so what you obtain here is this expression for the carrying capacity in terms of your external supply of resources, and R star, and all the other things here is M, K, R, M, which are the parameters of your problem. Okay, so this is attack rate R, this is death rate, this is connected to the how to say that the handling time, which is embodied by the Rosenzweig-Macarthur equations, functional form. So this is what we call a mechanistic derivation of the carrying capacity. I modeled the system with the resource, and I obtain a value for n, okay, at equilibrium. And can show that this is an attracting stable fixed point. Okay, I don't want to do that again, a little bit cumbersome to do every time the stability analysis. Okay. So first, glory. We don't have carrying capacities, but we have equilibrium populations, which are a mechanistic representation of the phenomenological constant K, which is called carrying capacity. Okay. Very nice. Okay. So, victory. Now, let's go for 2 consumers and 1 resource. So they will compete for the resource. And we want to see what happens. Okay. So, let me move here. So, let's start here. You will have dn1 dt, you will have dn2 dt, and you will have some dr dt. Okay? You agree? Okay. Now, I will simplify the system just in order not to spend too much time with all the small algebras which when you use this form here. So I will do something simpler, which obviously is not very realistic if you wanted to do something realistic, but we want only to see qualitatively what will happen here. Okay? So I will assume that this is just R1 times R times N1, okay? Without the fraction here, okay? So this has no effect of handling time, but, okay? But obviously you can put it there and it will be good result and so on. But just to have simple minus M1 R, okay? Now, same thing here. Like that. And I didn't write. Okay. So you have to have something here, which is R times S minus R minus gamma 1 R n 1 times R. Conversion factor, okay? Gamma 1 R1 minus gamma 2 R2 R times N2. Okay? So it's not a Volterra-like thing. Yeah, that's the question, yeah.
Sorry, I have a doubt. It is N instead of R because you're modeling the rate of death. It says in the first equation M1 multiplied by N, or it's
yeah, sure. Sorry, it's N2. Thank you. And so, what do you think will be the outcome of this? Intuitively. What will be the outcome? So will there be coexistence? Will there be elimination? Will there be cycles? Will there, what will be? What do you expect will come out from this? I have time to wait for your answers. Yeah.
I think it depends on small R1 and R2. If R1 is like way bigger than R2, the first population will outcompete the other one. And resources will be limiting for those. But there will be no equilibrium unless the two R's are the same.
Yeah, it's on more or less on this thing, okay? But, okay, more on the yes. Can there be equilibrium? So the answer, the question is it possible to have a solution where in equilibrium where N1 in equilibrium and N2 in equilibrium are different from 0? Hmm? Okay, wow. There's a very special solution which is, but I will explain in a moment, okay? But in general,
I think that there will be an equilibrium because the species are not competing between them. So that's why I think
There will be.
they will be.
Okay, you think it will be. More questions, more answers. Let's see.
I think that another way to find the equilibrium is a really big growth of the resources. Then if you
S2?
have a lot of resources, if that increase much more than the growth of the species, so we will probably have an equilibrium.
Okay, a lots of resources. Okay. Okay. So more. There.
Okay, I also believe if it's like a species that don't like consume a lot, like don't need many resources, it will be an equilibrium.
With the other species or
Yes.
or with the resource only? I mean,
With
is there
the other
coexistence or not?
Yeah, I believe that if one species don't need a lot of resources, it will be an equilibrium.
Okay. So, yeah, it would be the case that we discussed of weak competition and then in the competition class. Yeah? Okay. More.
I have a question. So, in this case, how can we have weak competition if they are only one resource for both of them? Can there be weak competitions?
So
Because they are both
that's the
is-
question, yeah. I
Yes.
mean,
They're both specialists, so I don't think that is possible.
okay, because both are specialists, then maybe there will be no weak competition. More. More ideas? So, okay, there's one here and then, I mean, like one?
For having equilibrium, as some of my colleagues said, we need to have resources. So it would be good to have a big S and like a small gamma 1, small gamma 2, so we don't consume too much resources. And we also want the species to exist, so it would be nice to have a small m1, small m2. So must have some balance between the constants to have some equilibrium.
Okay, for certain balance of constants that should be equilibrium here.
I think I was going to say something similar about the gamma values. I think that maybe with small gamma values it can reach an equilibrium point where the two species can coexist.
So let's look at this and try to find the finite point. Okay. So gn1 dt equal to 0 was very simple. Okay, it's just r star equal to m1 over r on. gn2 dt equal to 0 means r star is equal to m2 over r2. Okay? So I have an overdetermined system because either r is this one or is this one, unless they are equal. But this is what we call a non-generic case. What is non-generic? This would be very special species competing in such a way that they actually do fine-tuning of their constants such that they could have the same R. Okay? But any small variation of this, then this is not anymore equal to this one. Okay? Therefore, there's no way of having both at equilibrium, on non-zero equilibrium. It's always elimination. All the time. Okay? So this means that one of them, there's the equilibrium which is 0. So the possible equilibrium here will be one species being equal to 0 and one species being equal to what the new carrying capacity thing, because the one is eliminated, it goes back to the previous model. Okay? So I will write this index here, and now the question is, which species prevails? So this means here that, okay, in terms of the discussion we have, that with one resource there's no such thing as weak competition. You were right. Okay? There's no such thing as weak competition. Okay? So, well, obviously you will have to have S sufficiently big and R1 minor, this guy is here also such that the species, both species have to be viable without any interference from one to, okay? Because that's the same equation I wrote before, okay? So, good, very good. Now, so in order to assess this thing, what we will do is, okay, so we know that either species 1 or species 2 will prevail, okay? So let's say that N1, okay, let's say that the resource is at equilibrium with species 1, okay? Let's say, okay? Now, this means that we would have N star is the carrying capacity, and then you have a certain number of resources there, and then you say, okay, if I now introduce N2, okay, a small amount, okay? If I introduce N2, there are two possibilities. If N2 has a negative derivative, then it does not increase. Okay? If it's a positive derivative, means that it increases, but it cannot be in equilibrium. Therefore, it will eliminate N1. So there are both possibilities. Okay? So what we need to do is to, I will write it this way. Okay? This way. And this is very simple. This is with N2. This is R2. R2 times R1 star minus M2. And now this is simply equal to R2 M1 over R1 minus M2, which I will write just this way. Okay, this way. And this is what? This is R1 star minus R2 star. Okay. So, it will depend on the difference between these equilibrium resources and okay, just R1 is the resource that is in equilibrium with N1 when N2 is not present. And R2 is the equilibrium resource when N1 is not present and only N2. Okay? So when they are not competing, when one is absent, they will have different equilibrium at resources. The resources will have a different equilibrium. So if R1 star minus R2 star is negative, then means that when this is negative means that d and dt goes to 0. Okay? Therefore, there's no invasion of N2 in a population which is at N1, at the carrying capacity. So, okay, and this will imply that N2 will go to 0, and N1 will go to the new carrying capacity here, which I did not calculate, but because this comes from here, okay? I didn't even write this. I don't need it now, okay? But N1 goes to equilibrium, and the resource will be, R1. Okay? So there's an equilibrium between R1 and N1, and N2 goes away, okay? Because of this. So this is called an invasion analysis. I have some species, okay, and at equilibrium, and I say I introduce a new species. Right? If the new species is able to invade, right? In this case, this means, as we know there is no equilibrium, that the species will win the competition, so to say. Okay. Therefore, if R1 minus R2 is positive, then you get the contrary, okay? And you get that N1 will have to go to 0, and I have equilibrium between N2 and R2 star. Okay? So always elimination. Okay? No way of coexistence. Well, different from what we had before, yeah? And then no way of coexisting on only one resource.
Now if we consider another type of interaction like mutualism.
Okay, this will change everything.
Exactly.
Okay. We are doing consumer resource dynamics pure. Okay? So only consumer resource dynamics, and only competition for resources. But clearly we can have other things. And actually we will discuss this next classes, where we will have, for instance, one case, which is maybe the one that I will develop more extensively, which is called Intra Predation, where you have a consumer. One resource has two consumers, but one of the consumers is able to consume, to prey upon the other. This can create equilibrium. Right? So I'm not saying that, we are pretty much in this context. Then you could say, okay, but what if you had put back this functional form here, functional response, instead of this one? Same thing, just more calculations, and so that's why I just simplified the thing. Okay, no problem. So good, and sure that we can also have a different resource dynamics. Okay, but well, you see, many possibilities are open, and the outcome of this kind of thing will depend on the exact biological mechanisms. If you have, I have put this type of resource and here, but could be also something else. Okay, yeah.
I have a question. When R1 minus R2 is equal to 0, the two species go to 0?
No, when R1 equal to R, that would mean this guys here equal to, well, this would mean that they are actually the same, have exactly the same characteristics here. Okay, and you could put them together and on one species only. Okay, but the point is, and then in order to do the analysis, you have to go something a little bit different. But the point is, if a small variation, I mean, if this is 0, but it's 0.001, it's not anymore, then after long transient, you will have the elimination of one of them, because this is what we call it's non-generic, something that happens only for a particular combination of the parameters, right? So this would not be valid in general for species in general. This would be for certain very particular species in the world. Okay, so that's why we don't consider this now. Now, well, now we can extend this model easily for 2 consumers and 2 resources. Okay? Yeah.
Could you please do a graphical representation of the dynamics of elimination, the way that it happens, if it's possible?
Oh.
Or it will be very complicated.
Well, I would have to I mean, maybe on Friday I can do the numeric stuff for this, okay?
Okay.
I can do the numerics.
Just to see
The
if we
solution.
can recognize this process happening in... Do you understand what I mean by it?
No, yeah, what you have here is that it will be very, let's say, very similar to the Volterra model, and you know, we have seen this plots from Gauss which have elimination of the. So what you have usually will be one of them just going this, and the other one just doing something whoop. Sometimes it depends. It can sometimes it can increase and decrease, and sometimes no. Sometimes it just can't invade, because this is not the. You could. Okay, let's go be more specific. You can have this. Okay, say this is N1 and this is N2. Okay, so then you'd say, come on. The derivative of N2 here is positive. Okay? So it's invading. Now, what an invasion analysis is about is one of them is in equilibrium, and then the other one comes with a small population and tries to invade. Okay? That's the thing. Okay? So you can have an increase, temporary increase here. Depends on the well, that's again the RK story. Okay? If this has a sufficiently big increase at big R2, maybe it can increase, okay, and then gets eliminated because competition becomes important. Yeah? So you have this possibility. So that there's something here. And then you could also think about, well, if this is a long time scale, okay, here, this guy going away. If I have only observed for some time, I could have the impression that this will be a situation of coexistence. Okay. So the connection with the experimental thing, the connection with the experimental thing when we do in the lab, it's easy because the time scales are not so large. But in other case, you better have to pay attention for data when you look at data. That are you in a situation where you are in a transient or are in a situation that's approaching a fixed point or limit cycle. Yeah? And you can have transients. Yeah? Now, I forgot to say something else before we move to the next example, is that we could also have R equal to R2 stars, and then you would do the same computation and it would get the same result here, okay? Just changing 1 for 2, okay? So this means that there is if R1 is smaller than R2, okay, you will always get that N1 prevails at the end. Okay? And when you study biological invasions, okay, that's something else. I mean, I'm not studying biological invasion. I'm just using a technique used by biological invasion analysis to make this simple here. Sometimes you have what people call mutual invasibility. Okay? That's something that exists in nature. So if one species is at carrying capacity is there, and species 2 is able to invade, But say that this species 2 is at equilibrium and N1 is also able to invade, contrary to this case. Okay? Then both can invade. This can be shown to imply coexistence. Okay? So, going for the next one, which is also very simple. Would be just modifying this thing here, so with two resources, okay? So there will be resource. Okay, let me write it in this way, okay? I divide by N1. So there will be R1 resource 1 times nothing plus R2 resource 2 minus M. Okay? Now I have two resources. Yeah? 1 over N2 dN dt equal to 0 has some, okay, this is the R1 1 and R1 2, okay? Okay? That's the effect of consumer resource 1 has on the increase of the population 1. Okay, and that's the effect of the resource 2 on the population 1. Okay, and so here goes the same thing. R2 1 R1 plus R2 2 R2 minus M2, and then you have the resource dynamics for 1. No, that's not a good idea. Will be some A1 S1 minus R 1 minus some exactly the same thing here. Okay, I want to. We never use this equation. Okay, what I want you. Okay, for R1 you have one equation like that, and for R2 you have also an equation like that. Okay, my point is now that we want to look for the possibility of having N1 and N2 at equilibrium. Okay, so now if I look at this equation, it's you have R1 and R2 here, and also R1 and R2. You have two linear equations for two variables. So that has a solution. Before we didn't have this. Okay? Either N1 has to be 0 or N2 has to be 0. Here no. You can have equilibrium with resource R1 and equilibrium with resource R2, meaning that there is possible coexistence. Okay? Now, the good question is then, okay, will it always be a coexistence? No. Okay? Not necessarily, because you can have instabilities. Okay, I mean, you can have both calculate this, and then you have the mutual invisibility thing. You have to calculate. I want to do this calculation, okay? And then, for instance, if typically you have a situation where, say, species 1 is more efficient in consuming the resource 1. And species 1 is also more efficient in consuming the resource 2. Then it probably will eliminate, it will depend a little bit on balance of things, but will eliminate N2. But if N1 is more efficient, then for resource 1 and N2 is more efficient for resource 2, so there's a kind of partitioning, okay? So this partitioning implies that you can have coexistence, because then you have really something which is a weaker competition. You could have, for instance, that both can consume N1 and N2, but N1 has a strong preference for the resource 1, and the other has for the resource 2. So they compete, yeah, but could be weak, right? Could be. They can arrange themselves to coexist. So this is what you won't find in books For instance, you find this in this book. That's where it has even developed by David Tillman, which is resource competition and community structure. Okay, that's a typical book which mathematicians don't like it, and ecologists probably will like it better, because why? He doesn't do any of these calculations. He does everything graphically. But when you go for two resources and two consumers graphically, you can imagine the mess that you will have to take all possible cases and make a plot for all possible cases. So that goes very long. I mean, can have a lot of things, okay? But well, it's a nice book also because it discusses cases where you actually expect this to happen in nature, has examples and so on. So it's a nice book, okay? But anyhow, here you, on this ecological niches, you also have this book about ecological niches. You will have this kind of thing also. I think has, I don't know if it has the math. Yeah, no, it's graphical. It's okay, again, graphical. So if you are more on the analytical, mathematical guy, you have to develop it yourself or find it somewhere else, okay? So anyhow, but it is also immediate that if I now have 3 consumers and 2 resources, I will have 3 equations, but I have only R1 and R2. 3 equations for R1 and R2. It's over-determined system, okay? And there's no triple coexistence. There can be only 2 coexisting on 2 resources. If I put a new one, this thing here has no solution again. Okay, there was a new equation here with index 3, but you still have R1, R2. You have these 2 equations plus 1 equation more. Okay, therefore there's no solution. Okay, you have 3 linear equations, but only 2 variables. Okay? It is immediate that on n, on a certain number of, say n of resources, different resources, there can only coexist n consumers in this setting. Okay, so the number of resources, the number of different resources gives you the maximum of the number of consumers that can coexist. Okay? Yeah, but then let's get back to Hutchinson. Well, yeah, there's so many species coexisting in the world. So, and then there comes the famous paradox of the plankton. You have a certain limited number of plankton, for phytoplankton, it's a limited number of resources. It's just nitrogen or potassium or oxygen or whatever. So there should not be so many species. Okay, that that's which is called the paradox of Plankton, has to do with the things that we have not discussed, but we did discuss a little bit on last Friday, okay? Because, you don't take space into account here, okay? So space can also be important. There can be refugia, for instance. You have situation where N1 eliminates N2, but in a certain other region of the space, it's not possible because maybe it's a hiding place for the species that would be eliminated. So therefore, there are mechanisms that can make coexistence possible, and then there are other mechanisms like predators. Okay, so for instance, you could have competition for one single resource between 2, but then there's a predator, and the predator maybe predates more the one that would win the competition. So maybe it can regulate. Okay. So you see that in order to approach more real things, you will need some networks of interactions. You cannot think only about competition. Okay? So all of this is very beautiful, but now let us discuss something more conceptual. Okay, so I think I hope that the mathematics here was not too difficult. It's just finding the fixed points and seeing that some linear equations don't have solutions, therefore they cannot be coexistent, okay? So that's what people more or less call the modern competition theory or whatever, okay? It has more mechanistic and it is the building blocks for will be the building blocks for more complex network of interactions, okay? So we will see some networks of interactions tomorrow and Wednesday, okay? Some simple cases, and there's like one consumer with you have a resource, then you have a consumer, which is a generalist, and it could even eat all the resource. Okay? But then maybe you have a predator there, okay? So this could regulate everything. And this is the famous paper, birds that protect, cats protecting birds. Usually a cat does not protect a bird. But there could be some prey, like some kind of rodent or rat or whatever, that preys upon the eggs of the birds and would not choose which species of its generalist. So it could drive to zero populations, and for instance, it could prey not only on eggs, on something else. So it could take the population to zero in this case, if it's very efficient. Okay? But then you can have a cat, and the cat says, "Oh no, I will consume this rodents, and I can get equilibrium." Okay? It's a very famous. Maybe I will show you this paper tomorrow or after tomorrow. Okay. So for now, let's move to some conceptual discussion about niches. Okay, there's a question.
Sorry. The conclusion was that if we have more species and less resources, then the coexistence won't be.
No, that on, say you have certain number of resources, 10 resources, there can be only 10 species coexisting.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that there will be 10, because maybe there's one is a super consumer and that eliminates the others. But it's possible to have up to 10, not more. Okay? But in this simple cases where all interactions that are involved are only competitions per resources. Okay? That's why I'm saying, maybe you have other things going around but promote coexistence. Okay, that's next in the course. Okay? But that is here it appears as a simple mathematical result that you cannot have overdetermined, you don't have solutions for overdetermined linear equations for the resources here. That's all.
Okay, but this is because the equations are linear, right? But
could be nonlinear also. Yeah, the point is you could have this. Okay, I could go back to this one. Okay, but still, you see that this will still be solvable, and I actually have the calculation here. But I mean, I didn't want. I simplified it because I didn't want to go very extensively. So, but this fact that if R1 is smaller than R2, and it means that elimination of two in the presence and the equilibrium with the resource of 1. Okay, this is you can do this. Then you have R1 star, R2 star, R3 star. So put it. You can see. You have this what is called the R star rule, okay, which was invented by Tillman. Okay, so this translates as long as you have fixed points. Where you can have complicated dynamics. If I put a full Rosenzweig-Macarthur thing, where you can have oscillations, that then then it will come to either sustainable oscillations or not, and this is much more complicated, okay? Because one form of different equilibrium is what we could call a dynamic equilibrium, okay? Both are present, but they are cycling. That's possible to exist. Yeah? But not with the resource being modeled by this. Okay, this is very strong damping. So let's talk about niches. So anybody knows or would like to say what's a niche? Yeah, where's the telephone? The mic. Mic.
So a niche for Hudson, I guess, it's how I explain, like not the function, but how a species survive how they thrive in a habitat. So I think it can be defined as the niche of a species like this.
Yeah, this is one way of looking at niches. Yeah, what are the requirements for a species to survive in a given habitat? But let's go more opinions.
I would. Well, maybe too general too, but it's like the set of conditions for a species to survive in a specific environment.
Yeah. The condition for a species to survive. Yes.
Yeah, but I believe that important part is the biotic and the abiotic environment. Like
so the relation between biotic and abiotic.
Resources, room, space.
Okay. So anyone else would like to?
Okay, and besides biotic and abiotic, you also have to take into account geographical space.
Geographical space, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, historically, the first time that people thought in this context talked about niche was Grinnell in the beginning of the 20th century. And for Grinnell, that was something very much different what is the modern niche. Grinnell is just the niche. It's like when you say, I have my niche at home, like, okay, I'm okay in this place here, okay? So it is much more geographical. But where niches were a descriptive niche of Grinnell, which is, it's where this certain species can live. Okay? Think back. Competitive exclusion comes only in the 30s with Gauss and Raymond Pearl. So this was before. So there was no real think about competitive exclusion and why species coexist. It was much more so descriptive. But actually, this has produced a lot of nice discussions about something which is what people would call equivalent species. Equivalent species would be species that, for instance, there is a famous, let me give an example. There are bird communities that have been studied in California and in Chile, for instance, okay? Very nice, etc. So, but that are not the same species. But they have the same structure. There's one that there are like 5 or 6 small birds, passerine, and then there are some that are like larger grouse, like doves or something. Then there's maybe 1 or 2 raptors, and not 10 raptors. So there's an equivalence. But so the species would be equivalent. Okay, so this created the idea of ecological equivalence. With this data on California and Chile, then there were further studies with lizards And also, there were found a lot of equivalence. But then, people also tried, okay, this is Chile and California. Okay, let's go further. Okay, let's go, I don't know, other places that have more or less the same climate, the same place, and so on. Will it be also that I will find this thing? So not in general. Not in general. They tried with South Africa and Australia and so on. Okay, so not in general. And also, they also studied the plant communities in Chile and in California, in the same places where you had this bird. And the plant communities have some resemblance, but only general traits, like the say that the trees are high or not, and so on, but not equivalent species by species. Okay? So but that's generated quite a lot of interesting thinking about why you have a species in certain places and maybe what shapes this community. So that this brings up that if it's not only the environment, what shapes a community? Okay, so maybe it's predation, competition. So this is the essential questions of community ecology. What shapes it? Okay? But now, further, then you have the niche in the concept of Hutchinson, which is like, you'd say something like that. Say we have two abiotic factors. Okay? So temperature, humidity, okay? And then there's a range of temperatures and a range of humidity where maybe a certain given species can live. Okay? And this is very, very much used, for instance, for insects and so on, which don't regulate temperature. That's very, very specific. They don't have, for instance, we have a large spectrum of temperatures where humans can live, okay? Because we regulate metabolically the temperature, but there are species like the insects that don't regulate the temperature, so they have very short intervals of temperatures where they can live. So this would be what is called the fundamental niche, okay? Yeah, it has to be. If it has this, in principle, it could live there. Okay, can be multidimensional. There can be other things, but there are other species, right? And maybe there's another species which has also niche here, which overlaps here. Okay. So there will be a competition here, and there could be that, for instance, the yellow species 1, okay, let's call this 1, and call this 2. There could be that species 2 prevails, therefore species 2 has the full niche, and species 1 has a part of the niche. Okay, so it's not. So that's the way to use resource competition and consumer resource things and so on, and then you say this is the realized niche. Actually, in that place, the realized niche is this one because of this guy here, which is not allowing the full exploitation of the complete fundamental niche. Okay, so that's the way of looking at this by Hutchinson, but there has serious drawbacks also. I mean, it's nice because you have this diagrams and so on, and the modern niche theory also has kind of diagrams and so. But one drawback is it takes only into account competition. Okay? So it's the fundamental structure of the communities and the niche is dependent only on competition for resources. Okay, here I have two abiotic, but I could also have something like food. Okay, like food, general. Okay, so but it's not only competition that exists in the nature. Then you could go and then there is this book which extend the Hutchinson way of thinking to have more. Oops. You have this is the Shays-Liebold niche theory, which is an advance to Hutchinson, which considers situations where you have, for instance, one species and that has two resources, for instance. Okay, so the species would be resource 1, resource 2, and then here there's a region where you would have, okay, if you have a lot of this, I could have that species can live here and not here. Okay, this would be saying, okay, if R1 and R2 the resources are too small, then it's eliminated. Okay, but you can have many diagrams like that. Okay, so for instance, you could have things like, for instance, resource 1 and resource 2. Here, let's say that you have this. Then you could have something like this. Now, the niche is something like this. Okay? So in this case, both resources are limiting. Okay? If resources 1 is small, then no matter how large R2, it is eliminated. So it's essential, and vice versa. So that's an essential resource. Now, I could have the one that we had here before. No, okay. Like this and here. So this is alternative. I mean, if you don't have enough resource 2, 1. If I don't have enough 1, but I can consume sufficiently large value of resource 2, I can exist. So this is this kind of modern niche theory thing. Okay, but then you could also, instead of resources, say predators. Okay, so instead of resources, you can make something like this. Let me see. Have 2 predators, for instance, 2 predators and one species being preyed upon, then predator 1 and predator 2 would probably can give you something like that. And you prevail only if they are not too large. Okay? If predator 1 or predator 2 have very big populations, then you get in this region, you are eliminated. Okay? So this is the Shays-Liebold niches. Okay? And that's not all. But one other critique that you can do for the Hutchinson niche, but well, there's one that is obvious, which is that if you have, for instance, the niche of Hutchinson with food, then this is not taking into account that the consumption of food will have effects. I mean, you're not doing the dynamics of the resources there. Okay, but there is another point. Say you have what we would call a Hutchinson fundamental niche, and with food, and on one scale. Okay, so everything needs food. Yes, so. And food and temperature or whatever. Okay? But now, food comes in not only the total amount of food is important, maybe the size of the food is important, which can determine if a species can eat actually the food. Maybe it cannot, if the size of the thing of the resource is too large, it cannot eat it, cannot consume it. So there are in Hutchinson you don't have this description for instance, of the variability of the resources, of the food, for instance, okay? So now usually what you will do is the next thing, the Macarthur theory, Macarthur and someone else, Richard Levins and Macarthur. So they introduced the idea that for food, you could look how species one, so food, and this is the size, okay, size. Maybe it's grains, maybe it's something that has variable size. And then say that the species one, the species you are modeling, maybe it prefers a certain size of food, okay? And then you could have something like that, okay? So, and this will translate later to a higher growth rate if you have the optimal size, which is the one that is more consumed, okay? So this is a way of looking for the niche, and this Macarthur Levins. And then the overlap of niches would be just I have another one here. And if this overlap is not too strong, then probably you can have coexistence or not, and so on. You can map the overlap, but now not in terms of total food availability, but also related to the characteristics of the resource. Okay, so this is almost, if you do this for all things that a certain species consumes, you're almost say mapping the natural history of this guy. So because here you have a lot of information. There's a preference for this and that and so on. So this is translating a lot of things that are sometimes studied in a less mathematical way. But this is also not very mathematical in any way. But it's conceptually like I have more or less natural history. Okay? So this is what we call a more modern view of niche theory, and and again, then you have these problems of ecological theories like this being difficult to really verify exactly. Okay, for instance, Macarthur Levins it's always true. You go and then you see what happens. Okay, so there's no way of doing an experiment saying no, this is not true. I mean, in the field. Okay, so it's always there's that's a critique to all of this. Okay, there's no way of having experiments with controls, for instance, and sound statistics. So there has been a reaction to this, which is the neutral theory, which came in the 80s and 90s, okay, which is something else, which I don't want to discuss now, which is something that doesn't take into account interactions, at least for plants. Okay.
The idea of the Macarthur model is to be incremental to Hutchinson. There's a way to translate, for example, to Hutchinson terms what Macarthur.
Yeah, depends. Yeah, more. I mean, you can always think, but it's a different way of thinking because here you are describing the heterogeneities of your resources. Okay, if the resources are only abiotic, okay, then even then, I mean, you could say my range of temperature goes from 10 to 20 degrees. But there could be optimal temperature, okay? And then when you have a niche intersection, and maybe if the optimal temperature are very distant, then you have coexistence, and if they are very close, you don't have. So it's not really directly translatable to Hutchinson, okay? It clearly has some. It's a related concept. I mean, yeah.
When you're talking about the niche based on the size food, the survival or you are looking for the plant survival, right? Because if you say, I don't know, if it's related with the dispersion of the, I don't know, the animal just ate and dispersed the seeds and have a more probabilities to, or something like that.
There's whole sets of interactions in nature, like this one that you also had discussed at some point on Friday. Sometimes you have this seed dispersal can be important, and seed consumption, and all of this. So yeah, for these situations, okay, you probably can look in this way, okay. But what this is much more here. This is descriptive niche. It's a description of what actually happens, okay. So it's not so much a theory, really. It's a descriptive theory. Okay? It's just describing things, and then maybe you can use a little bit of resource modeling and more complex and try to see when you have elimination or not, and how these curves are curves that may shape the structure of the community, meaning elimination, coexistence, or cycles, or whatever. Okay, so there are many ways, and then there are lots of work that have been done on this. Okay? And then there's something else about niches. Is not a new kind of niche, but it's niche, very applied things, which is actually it's called environmental niche modeling, or yeah, I think it's called this. Ecological niche. No, environmental niche modeling. So what is environmental niche modeling? Is, I think it's the specialty of Sarah. Well, maybe you should ask her. But as long as I know it, that's something that I'm not very familiar with. It integrates geographical information systems. It's related to macro habitats, not to micro habitats. So we are not looking for habitat for there are trees. So macro habitats, and then you have a lot of information systems which give you temperatures, humidities, many layers of possible information. For instance, vegetation cover, something that you get by GIS. Okay, and then you look. Okay, there's a species. Certain species is here, and then you see where the species range is, and then you say what are the variables here that actually shape this range. Okay, so then you say, okay, that's my niche. It's more environmental niche. It's not so much really competition things and so on. And this is, for instance, used. Sarah will maybe say it's not only, but probably. For instance, for plants, okay? Plants, when you have competition and so on, but it gets on a very long time scale, okay? So neutral theory is usually used well for plants. But so you can have a kind of region with determine which are, so you do a lot of statistics, yeah? Which are the really variables that determine this region where this species occurs, okay? And then you can go back to Grinnell and say, well, maybe there are other regions, maybe nearby or just on the other side of a mountain or whatever, that have the same characteristics, but if species is not there, then you would say that it's an empty niche, and you could have migration. You could have that this species could have effectively be in that. So this is important for what? Conservation biology. Okay? That's a conservation problem. And it's also very important for geographical determination of epidemiological risk. Okay? So also on the macro scales, okay? When you have vector-borne diseases that go from mosquitoes or, I mean, any bugs, and or even eat water and so on. So you can also think of this in terms of niche, okay? And then you can say, okay, for instance, climate change is modifying the temperatures, and the range where you have a certain species which can be the vector of a disease is also modified, can grow or not. I mean, it can shift to other places where there is no thing. So this is one of the things that's been very much discussed those days, which is also what Mercedes Pascual mentioned in the first opening lecture, which are the regions where you have the border between where you have a certain disease, like dengue or malaria, and where you don't have. Okay, and this can be seen a little bit like the niche variables important for that particular vector, or you could also go further, not only the vector but also the transmission possibility. So you can have this kind of geographical determinations usually connected to humidity, rainfall, and temperature. And for instance, we are seeing an expansion of the regions where you have a lot of dengue in Brazil. Okay? It's going south. Clearly, you have dengue in Porto Alegre, but didn't have 10 or 20 years ago. So, what? Exact explanations is still open problem. If you want an open problem, and then it's difficult because with this kind of, you will have a course on disease ecology. This is kind of things that you study in disease ecology. But it's difficult to study sometimes because you for instance, number of cases of a given disease, if it's notifiable, if it's notified by a system, then you more or less get the cases without very good precision, but you get the cases. But the dynamics of, say, mosquitoes over time, over years, that needs experimental setup to capture with traps for the things and do the statistics and so on. There's very little work on this because it's also expensive and so on. But there is work in Porto Alegre actually, because there's a company that sells the data about mosquitoes to the municipality. That's a particular case, but in general you don't have this. So okay, I think that's all for today. And so our next topic is, okay, very nice, consumer resource dynamics, but not so fun. Elimination, okay. Conceptually, we are now more in peace with ourselves than we were with the Lotka-Volterra stuff, okay? So we have a carrying capacity that is calculated from the parameters that define the consumer and resource relations. That's not anymore phenomenological, and we can now state what is the situations where you have competitive exclusion or not, where it is mandatory or where it's not mandatory, because of the number of resources. But well, we don't want more. Okay? We want not only competition, consumer resource things. We want now mix everything, and we have a lot of consumer resources, but you could have like also predators, and you could have even mutualism, whatever, many things that exist. Okay, so we will do some examples in the next two classes, and yeah. So please don't forget if you want questions for Friday. Okay, so okay, see you tomorrow.